Welcome back, everyone. Okay, I am absolutely thrilled to jump into today's explainer because we're looking at one of the most dramatic, turbulent, and honestly completely transformative periods in all of history. We are going to explore the origins of medieval India's cultural and political landscape, all through the lens of the Delhi Sultanate.
So here's the massive question we're tackling today. How exactly did 300 years of invasions, incredibly ruthless rulers, and some truly radical economic experiments forge a completely new Indian culture? Now, this isn't just going to be some dry list of dates and kings. We are going on a thrilling ride through a time of intense collision that somehow, against all odds, resulted in a really beautiful cohesion.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the initial shock of the invasions and early conquests. Second, we'll check out the messy reality of forging the Sultanate. Third, we'll dive into their wild economics and administration. And finally, we'll explore the syncretic culture that emerged.
All right, Part 1. Invasions and Early Conquests. The Catalyst.
This whole period was a brutal catalyst for everything that followed. It was driven largely by Arab and Turkic military raids, and these guys were in search of vast treasures and plunder to fund their massive empires back in Central Asia. The early invaders, like the famous Mahmud of Ghazni, operated with a completely ruthless military machine. And the Turks, they relied on a permanent professional army. This was definitely not some ragtag militia. Their military machine was built around an elite corps of highly mobile, mounted archers. These were soldiers who were bought, trained, equipped, and paid in cash, entirely from war booty. Their speed and their tactics were just absolutely devastating.
So the contrast out there on the battlefield was honestly pretty stark. On one side, you have the defending Rajput forces. Now, they had immense courage for sure, but they depended really heavily on war elephants. And elephants are spectacular to look at, but they're incredibly slow-moving. Plus, the Rajputs had somewhat lax regimental discipline. Contrast that with the Turkish forces. Superior cavalry, high mobility, skilled mounted archery, and really strict discipline. It was just a total mismatch of military technology and tactics, and that gave the Turks a definitive advantage.
Moving right along to Part 2, Forging the Sultanate. 3 centuries of rule.
So the early invaders eventually decided to stay, but plundering is one thing, right? Actually consolidating power and governing a massive, diverse subcontinent, that is an entirely different beast. The Delhi Sultanate wasn't just one continuous family. Over roughly 300 years, from 1206 to 1526, it was ruled by 5 distinct dynasties, and they were often violently overthrowing one another. We start with the slave dynasty, then we move to the Khaljis, the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids, and finally the Lodis. Succession was almost never smooth. It was basically a deadly game of musical chairs among nobles and generals.
But right in the middle of all this chaotic timeline, we get some absolutely incredible figures. Take Sultana Razia from the slave dynasty. The source text gives us this amazing detail from the traveler Ibn Battuta. Razia actually rode on horseback, just as men ride, armed with a bow and quiver, and she completely defied the strict gender norms of the era by ruling without a veil. Her reign was short, just 3.5 years, because the Turkish nobles simply could not stand being ruled by a woman who elevated non-Turkish officials. But her defiance, just a fascinating piece of this history.
Now, let's fast forward a bit to the Khalji dynasty and see how this builds, specifically with a ruler named Ala-ud-Din Khalji. Talk about a micromanager. To maintain his massive standing army and stop rebellions, he managed his empire with intense paranoia. He deliberately stripped nobles of their wealth so they wouldn't even have the means to hatch conspiracies. He banned liquor, he banned gambling, he even deployed this elaborate spy network straight into the local bazaars. And because he was the first sultan to actually pay his soldiers in cash rather than with looted booty, he had to strictly enforce price limits on essential commodities just to make sure those wages actually covered their living costs.
And get this, to stop merchants from cheating the system, Ala-ud-Din enforced a genuinely brutal rule. If a spy found that a seller was shortchanging a customer on weight, an equal weight of flesh was cut directly from the seller's body, literally thrown down before his eyes. It is absolutely shocking, but it perfectly illustrates the ruthless administrative grip he held over his economy.
That brings us to Part 3, Economics and Administration, Roller Coaster Reforms.
Okay, beyond the crazy price controls, the Sultanate fundamentally shifted the broader economy and brought in some radical, world-changing technologies. They revived the minting of gold coins, which signaled a huge revival in internal trade. But even more importantly, they connected India to global technological advancements. Papermaking technology, originally from China and learned by the Arabs, was introduced to India during this time. They also adopted the Chinese spinning wheel. That alone increased yarn production by 6-fold. These were not small tweaks. These were massive systemic changes that sparked immense urban growth in cities like Delhi and Daulatabad.
But not every economic idea was a home run. The Tughlaq dynasty gives us one of history's great financial disasters. To understand it, we need to quickly look at token currency. Basically, this is a system where a coin's physical material, like bronze or copper, is actually worth much less than its official face value, so it relies entirely on the people trusting the government's backing.
Well, Muhammad bin Tughlaq tried to introduce this exact system to India, replacing silver coins with bronze ones. It was an idea wildly ahead of its time, but the result? A total disaster. Because the government couldn't prevent fake coins from being minted, ordinary citizens just started mass counterfeiting the bronze coins right in their own homes. The currency was devalued so horribly that the government eventually had to withdraw the bronze coins and literally buy them back with real silver. It completely ruined the empire's financial resources.
All right, our final section, Part 4, A Syncretic Culture, the Ultimate Synthesis.
This brings us to the core takeaway of this entire explainer. Despite all those violent beginnings, the brutal market rules, and the failed economic experiments, a truly composite culture emerged. The Turco-Afghan conquest brought large-scale migrations from Central Asia, right? And as these migrants settled and mingled with the local Indian populations, it sparked a remarkable synthesis. We start seeing profound Hindu-Muslim collaboration across science, literature, music, painting, and architecture.
You can literally see this blending happening in real time with the architecture. Initially, the rulers just repurposed existing local buildings, often modifying Hindu and Jain temples to suit their needs. But over time, as West Asian artisans arrived, they introduced striking Saracenic features. Think the true arch and the large domes. And they perfectly integrated those with local Indian craftsmanship and materials, like red sandstone and marble. It's a physical, permanent manifestation of two worlds blending into one.
And this blend happened intellectually, too. Just look at scholars like Al-Biruni. He came to India, learned Sanskrit, and translated Greek works into Sanskrit while also transmitting Indian astronomical works back to the West. Or take the incredible poet Amir Khusro, who proudly called himself an Indian and praised India's languages, music, and people. Sanskrit stories were translated into Persian. Classical Sufism and the Bhakti movement found deep common ground in their devotion. It was just this rich cross-cultural intellectual exchange.
Which leaves us with a final, kind of provocative thought to chew on. If the Delhi Sultanate was born in brutal military conquest, yet ultimately resulted in such a profound, beautiful cultural harmony, how much of the modern world we recognize today was secretly forged in the fires of these medieval clashes? History is rarely just a simple story of good guys and bad guys. It's a messy, fascinating collision of ideas that ultimately builds our future. I really hope this explainer gave you a whole new perspective on how cultures are truly made. Keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.